I can hear my own heartbeat. That's all there is now, the thump, thump, thump echoing in this concrete box they call a cell. Day 84. I've been counting, scratching marks into the wall with a loose nail I found, hiding it from the guards during their twice-daily inspections. 84 days since my F4 Phantom went down over the jungle. 84 days since I've spoken to another American. 84 days of thinking I'm the only one left alive in this hell they call Horlo Prison. The Hanoi Hilton, we called it before I got here. Back when I thought I knew what fear was. The walls are sweating. It's 104 degrees today. I can tell by how fast the moisture beads on the stone. I've learned to read temperature by condensation patterns. You learn things like that when every day is exactly the same, when your world shrinks to 12 feet by 8 feet of darkness, interrupted only by the slot in the door where they shove a bowl of rice and a cup of water that tastes like rust. My left shoulder is dislocated. Has been since the third week. They did that during an interrogation session. I can still feel Lieutenant Colonel Than's breath on my face as he asked me about our bombing targets, our radio frequencies, the names of my squadron. I gave him nothing but my name, rank, and service number. Captain James Robert Morrison, United States Air Force, service number AF 187458826. That's all I've said in 84 days. But today is different. Today, at 0400 hours, I can tell time by the guard rotations now. I heard something I haven't heard since they threw me in here. Something that made my heart stop, made every hair on my body stand up, made me question whether I'm finally losing my mind. A sound. From the other side of the wall. Tap, 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 tap. Not random. Not pipes cooling or rats scratching. Deliberate, rhythmic, purposeful. Someone is on the other side of this wall. Another American, and they're trying to tell me something. My hands are shaking as I press my ear against the stone, holding my breath, listening so hard it hurts. The tapping comes again. Slower this time. 5 distinct patterns. I don't know tap code. I don't know what they're saying. But in exactly 17 seconds, I'm about to learn 5 words that will save my life. 5 words that will turn me from a man waiting to die into a man with a mission. 5 words that will transform this tomb into the starting point of the most audacious escape network in the history of American POWs. 5 words that 63 men will later credit with keeping them alive long enough to come home. But first, I have to understand them. And I have exactly 84 seconds before the guard makes his next round. If my story resonates with you, please hit the like button to bring a little light to this father's heart. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my upcoming life stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching this video from and what time it is there right now. It makes me so happy to know what corner of the country or world you're listening from. I need to take you back to understand how I ended up here. How a 26-year-old kid from Amarillo, Texas, who'd never been further from home than Dallas before joining the Air Force, ended up in a North Vietnamese prison cell, listening to tapping on a wall like it was a symphony. It was February 1968. The Tet Offensive had just kicked off, and our squadron was flying 3, sometimes 4 sorties a day out of Da Nang. I was a weapons systems officer, the guy in the back seat of the F4, handling navigation and weapons systems, while my pilot, Captain Dave Hernandez, flew the bird. We called ourselves the Undertakers because, well, that's what we did to SAM sites and supply lines. February 19th was supposed to be a milk run. Simple reconnaissance over Thanh Hoa province, photograph some suspected supply routes, head home for beer and poker. The weather was clear. Visibility was perfect. We were at 15,000 feet, well above small arms range, and we'd made this run a dozen times before. Then the cockpit lit up like a Christmas tree. Missile lock. SA-2 guideline coming up fast. Dave broke left, punched chaff and flares, but this one had our name on it. The explosion tore off our left wing. I remember the violent spin, the G-forces crushing my chest. Dave screaming into the radio, "Mayday, Mayday, Undertaker 2-6 is going down." I remember pulling the ejection handle, the rocket seat blasting me into the sky, the parachute deploying, and then looking down at the jungle canopy rushing up to meet me. I spent 3 days evading capture, living off water from vines, and moving north toward what I hoped was the DMZ. But North Vietnam isn't Texas. You can't just walk 20 miles through mesquite and call it a day. The jungle ate me alive. And on day 3, a patrol found me trying to cross a river at dawn. They didn't shoot me. I almost wish they had. Instead, they marched me north for 11 days, through villages where people spat on me, through rocks called me air pirate. When we finally reached Hanoi, they threw me in a truck, drove me through gates that closed behind me like a coffin lid, and shoved me into this cell. That was 84 days ago. You have to understand something about solitary confinement. It's not like what you see in movies. There's no dramatic countdown, no marking days with excitement. It's erosion. Every day, a little more of who you were washes away. You start talking to yourself, then answering yourself, then arguing with yourself. You replay memories so many times they stop feeling real. My wife, Linda, I couldn't remember the exact color of her eyes anymore. Were they hazel or green? I'd stared into those eyes 1,000 times and now I couldn't remember. I'd tried everything to stay sane. Exercise, push-ups and sit-ups until my muscles screamed, mental math, calculating fuel consumption rates, planning imaginary missions, reciting every poem I'd memorized in high school. But after 84 days, even those tricks were failing. The walls were closing in. Not literally, I checked every day, but in my mind, they were getting smaller. The interrogations came every week, sometimes twice a week. Lieutenant Colonel Tan was patient, methodical. He never raised his voice, just asked questions in his careful English, and when I gave him only name, rank, and service number, he'd nod politely and signal to the guards. They preferred dislocation to breaking bones, easier to hide from Red Cross inspectors. My left shoulder, my right wrist, 3 fingers on my left hand. They'd pop them back in after a few days, once the swelling went down. But the physical pain wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the silence. The absolute, crushing silence between interrogations. Just me and my thoughts weren't good company anymore. I'd started having conversations with my cellmates, imaginary friends I'd created to fill the void. There was Texas, a Marine from Houston who told elaborate stories about his ranch. There was Professor, an Air Force intelligence officer who discussed philosophy. And there was Ghost, who never spoke, just sat in the corner and reminded me that I might not make it home. By day 80, I was spending more time with these imaginary cellmates than with my real memories. That's when I knew I was losing the fight, not against the Vietnamese, against myself, against the silence. That's what made the tapping so important, because it meant I wasn't alone. It meant that somewhere in this maze of cells and corridors, there was another American, someone real, someone fighting the same fight. The tapping came again at 0400 the next morning, and this time I was ready. I pressed my ear against the wall, and I listened like my life depended on it. Because it did. The pattern was complex. Groups of taps separated by pauses. 5 distinct sequences. I grabbed my hidden nail and scratched marks on the wall, trying to capture the pattern. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, 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 tap. Pause, tap, 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 pause, tap, pause, tap, 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 tap. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the nail. What did it mean? Was it random? Was someone on the other side as desperate as me, just making noise to feel less alone? Then it came again, slower this time, more deliberate. The exact same pattern. This wasn't random. This was a code. Someone was trying to communicate. I tapped back. Just a simple rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. 3 beats. Hoping it meant something. Hoping they could hear me. The response came immediately. The same 5 sequences again, then nothing. I sat there for 3 hours, staring at my scratches on the wall, trying to decode them. I knew Morse code, but this wasn't Morse. The pauses were wrong. The groupings didn't match. This was something else. Something I'd never learned in survival training. The guard's footsteps approached. I barely had time to hide the nail before the slot opened, and a bowl of rice appeared. I grabbed it mechanically, shoved a handful in my mouth without tasting it. All I could think about was the pattern on the wall. Tap, 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 tap. I spent the entire day trying to break the code. I tried assigning letters by frequency. I tried treating each tap as a binary digit. I tried mapping it to the alphabet forwards and backwards. Nothing worked. By evening, I was ready to scream. The tapping had given me hope, and now that hope was turning into frustration, which was worse than despair. Then at 2100 hours, the tapping came again. But this time it was different. This time, after the 5 sequences, there was a new pattern. Simple, deliberate, tap, pause, tap, pause, tap, pause, tap, pause, tap, 5 single taps, spaced evenly. Then the 5 sequences again. That's when it hit me. 5 taps, 5 sequences, 5 words. Each sequence represented 1 word. 1 word in a 5-word message. But how were the words encoded? I thought back to every code I'd ever learned. Then I remembered something from training that I'd barely paid attention to. A POW survival instructor talking about communication methods, something about a grid, something about rows and columns. A matrix, 5 rows, 5 columns, 25 letters of the alphabet, excluding K, which combines with C. First tap indicates the row, second sequence indicates the column. My heart was hammering. Could it be that simple? Tap, tap, second row, tap, 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 fifth column, second row, fifth column, that's J. I worked through the rest. Tap, 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 fifth row, tap, 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 third column, O, tap, 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 third row, tap, first column, K, tap, first row, tap, 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 fourth column, D, tap, 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 fourth row, tap, first column, P, J, O, K, D, P. No. That couldn't be right. I'd made a mistake somewhere. I went through it again, more carefully this time, checking my work against the scratches on the wall. And then I saw it. I'd been counting wrong. The pauses weren't just separating words, they were separating the row tap from the column taps. Let me do this right. First sequence, tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 tap. Row 2, column 5. J. No. Wait. I was still getting it wrong. I sat there in the darkness, my head in my hands, wanting to cry from frustration. Then the tapping came again. But this time, whoever was on the other side changed their approach. They tapped out 1 letter very slowly, with long pauses between the row and column indicators. Tap, long pause, tap, first row, first column, A, then they waited, giving me time to understand. Then another letter. Tap, long pause, tap, tap, first row, second column, B. Oh my God. They were teaching me, taking the time to make sure I understood the code before sending their message. We went through 6 letters like this, L through F. Then they sent the 5 sequences again. This time I got it. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. Row 2, column 3. H, tap, pause, tap, 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 tap. Row 1, column 5. E, tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 tap. Row 5, column 5. Y, no, Z, I recounted. Y, tap, 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 pause, tap. Row 3, column 1, K, tap, pause, tap. Row 1, column 1. A, H-E-Y-K-A. Still didn't make sense. Then I realized K and C share a cell in the matrix. The K could be a C. H-E-Y-C-A. Hey, Ka. Captain? No. Then it hit me like a physical blow, the most beautiful thing I'd heard in 84 days. Hey, K. Hey, Cap. Hey, Captain. Someone knew I was here. Someone knew my rank. Someone was saying hello. I pressed my forehead against the wall and wept. Real tears, the first I'd cried since they captured me. Not from pain or fear, but from relief so profound it was almost painful. I wasn't alone. I tapped back, my hands steady now with purpose. I sent my own 5-letter message, carefully, slowly, making sure each tap was distinct, H-E-L-L-O. The response came immediately, and this time they sent more than 5 letters. They sent a name, P-E-T-E-R-S. Peters. I didn't know any Peters in my squadron, but that didn't matter. Peters was real. Peters was American. Peters was alive. Over the next 3 days, we built a vocabulary. Simple words at first. Names, ranks, shoot-down dates. Then questions. How many cells? Where are you? Are you alone? Have you seen others? The answers crushed me and lifted me simultaneously. Peters was in the cell directly next to mine. He'd been here for 7 months, and he wasn't alone. There were 53 Americans in this prison. 53 men, all thinking they were alone, all suffering in silence, all separated by walls that were just thick enough to block voices, but thin enough to transmit taps. Peters explained the code more fully over those days. It was called the tap code, invented by Air Force prisoners early in the war. A simple 5x5 matrix where you could spell out any message, one agonizingly slow letter at a time. The code was spreading through the prison system like a virus, passed from cell to cell, prisoner to prisoner, carried by men who were moved during interrogations or re-education sessions. But here's what Peters told me that changed everything. Here's the 5 words that saved not just me, but dozens of us. He sent WEARENOTALONE. We are not alone. 5 words split across 7 letters, but I counted them as 5 distinct concepts. We are not alone. And then the implied 5th word that every American POW understood: resist. We are not alone. Resist. Those 5 words became my prayer, my mantra, my reason to keep fighting. Every morning when I woke up in the darkness, I'd tap them out to Peters. Every night before I tried to sleep on the concrete floor, he'd tap them back to me. But the code wasn't just for comfort. It was for intelligence, for survival, for resistance. Peters had been compiling information for months. Which guards could be bribed, which interrogators were most brutal, which prisoners were resisting, which were collaborating. He'd been building a network, a command structure, even in captivity, and now I was part of it. The senior ranking officer in the prison was a colonel I'll call Stevens, held in a cell 3 rooms away. Through the tap code network, Stevens had been issuing orders. Resist interrogation, share no information, maintain discipline, keep faith, stay strong. And here's the thing, nobody back home understood. Following those orders was harder than any combat mission I'd ever flown. It's easy to be brave for 30 seconds during a dogfight. It's almost impossible to be brave for 8 hours during an interrogation session when they're dislocating your joints one by one, and you know that saying 3 words, just 3 words about bombing targets or radio frequencies, would make it stop. But we had something now that we didn't have before. We had each other, not physically but mentally. Through those walls, through those taps, we were a unit again. We were a squadron. We were brothers. The tap code network grew. Peters and I tapped to the cells on our other sides. Those prisoners tapped to theirs. Within 2 weeks, we had 20 cells connected. Within a month, the entire cell block was online, as we called it. 47 Americans, passing messages through stone walls, building a resistance network that the Vietnamese didn't even know existed. We developed shorthand. Instead of tapping out full words, we created abbreviations. GBU meant God bless you, our way of signing off. STF meant stay tough, friend. USAF or USN or USMC identified your service branch. And the most important one, RI, radio inspection. It meant guards were coming, stop tapping, hide your nail. We also developed a news network. Whenever someone was taken for interrogation, they'd try to glean information from their captors, sometimes deliberately asking naive questions to trick the guards into revealing things. When was the war ending? Were there protests back home? What were the bombing targets this week? Then they'd come back and tap the news through the network. The intelligence flowed both ways. Stevens would send tactical guidance, which interrogators to Stonewall, which ones you could give false information to, which guards were vulnerable to bribery. That information had saved lives. It had prevented breakdowns. It had kept our network intact. But the Vietnamese weren't stupid. They knew something was happening. Prisoners who'd been broken, who'd stopped talking entirely, suddenly seemed to have renewed resistance. Men who should have given up were staying strong. Something was keeping us unified, and they were determined to find out what. That's when the cell inspections intensified. Random times, multiple times per day. They'd burst in, strip your cell, check every crack in the walls, confiscate anything that could be used as a writing implement or tapping tool. I lost 3 nails that way. Each time I had to start over, searching through the mortar between stones for hours to find a new piece of metal. They also started playing audio, propaganda broadcasts, American music, fake news reports designed to demoralize us. "The war is lost," a voice would say in English. "Your country has abandoned you. Your families have moved on. Confess your war crimes, and we'll send you home." But through it all, the tapping continued, more carefully now, in shorter bursts, with more sophisticated signals to indicate danger, but it never stopped. Peters became more than a voice through the wall. He became my lifeline. On day 93, when I developed dysentery from contaminated food and spent 3 days curled on the floor unable to move, Peters tapped constantly. Jokes, stories, memories of home, anything to keep me conscious, to keep me fighting. When the guards finally brought a medic, I learned later it was because Peters had started a tapping campaign. Every prisoner in the network had simultaneously started kicking their cell doors and making noise until the Vietnamese had to investigate. That's when I understood what those 5 words really meant. We are not alone. It wasn't just a statement of fact. It was a promise, a commitment. We would look out for each other. We would keep each other alive. We would all go home together, or none of us would go home at all. The tap code saved my life in other ways too. One night around day 100, Peters tapped a warning. New guard. Crazy. Careful. He'd overheard guards talking about a new transfer from the south, a corporal who'd lost his entire family in a B-52 strike and was looking for revenge against American pilots. This guard, Peters warned, was unpredictable and violent. 2 days later, that guard opened my cell slot to deliver food. I was ready. I took the bowl without meeting his eyes, said, "Cam on." "Thank you," quietly, a trick we'd learned sometimes worked to humanize yourself, and backed away immediately. The guard stared at me for a long moment, his hand on his sidearm, but then moved on. Peters told me later that this same guard had beaten another prisoner unconscious for making eye contact. The warning had saved me from a potential beating, maybe worse. The network also became our way of maintaining sanity through humor. Yes, humor. You'd be surprised how much we joked, even here. Someone would tap out, "Joke incoming," and then spend 20 minutes laboriously tapping out a punchline that everyone had heard a dozen times, but still made us smile because it was normal, it was human. It was a reminder that we weren't just prisoners, we were still us. Peters's favorite joke, which he tapped to me at least once a week. Why did the pilot bring a pencil to bed? To draw the curtains. Terrible joke, absolutely terrible. But every time he tapped it out, I found myself smiling in the darkness. We also passed messages for each other, personal messages. When Lieutenant Rodriguez, 3 cells down, learned that his wife had given birth to a son, the message traveled through the network to him within hours. We all tapped congratulations. It took 3 days to transmit all the well wishes, but Rodriguez later said it was the best 3 days of his captivity. Similarly, when we learned that Sergeant Kim's father had died, the grief and support flowed through those walls. The tap code wasn't just for logistics and intelligence, it was for brotherhood, for humanity, for reminding us that we were more than prisoners, more than serial numbers, more than the sum of our suffering. But the Vietnamese were getting closer to discovering our system. On day 112, they moved Peters. No warning, no explanation. I woke up to the sound of his cell door opening, footsteps, shouts, and then silence. The cell next to mine was empty. I felt like I'd lost a limb. Peters had been my constant companion for 28 days. We'd tapped for hours every day. I knew his life story. Growing up in Pennsylvania, playing high school football, meeting his wife at a USO dance, his kids' names and birthdays. And now he was gone. I tapped to the wall anyway. "Peters? GBU, where?" No response. I tapped to the cells on my other side, asking if anyone knew anything. The response came from Lieutenant Harrison, 2 cells over. "Peters moved to punishment block, Vietnamese suspect code." My blood ran cold. The punishment block was where they sent prisoners for re-education, weeks or months of intensified interrogation, torture, and isolation designed to break them completely. Had Peters been caught tapping? Had someone informed? Was our entire network compromised? For 3 days I heard nothing. No taps, no messages. The network went silent, everyone afraid that we'd been discovered, afraid that talking would bring the guards down on us. Then, on day 115, I heard it. Faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. Tap, 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 tap. A new voice from the cell where Peters had been, Someone new had moved in. I waited, unsure whether to respond. It could be a trap. The Vietnamese could have planted an English-speaking operative in Peters's cell, trying to get us to reveal the code. But then the tapping came again, this time with a pattern I recognized, the teaching pattern, a through F, each letter carefully spelled out. Whoever was in that cell was teaching themselves the code by listening to the network around them. They were trying to connect. I made a decision. I tapped back. Who? The response was slow, laborious, each letter taking multiple attempts. But eventually, it came through. Martinez, Navy shot down yesterday. A new prisoner, fresh capture. And somehow, in less than 24 hours in this hell, Martinez had already figured out there was a code and was trying to learn it. Over the next week, I taught Martinez everything Peters had taught me. The matrix, the abbreviations, the protocols, how to hide his tapping tool, which guards to watch for, how to interpret the warning signals. And Martinez told me something that changed everything. Before they captured him, before his F-4 went down off the coast, he'd been briefed on the tap code. Word was spreading back at the bases. Pilots shot down earlier had been released during prisoner exchanges, and they'd told intelligence about the system. The Pentagon knew, the rescue teams knew, and they were working on ways to use it. Martinez had information about an upcoming operation. He didn't have details. Those weren't shared with pilots in case of capture, but he'd heard rumors. A major prisoner rescue attempt, commandos, helicopters, a raid on a prison camp. Nobody knew which camp or when, but it was coming. This information exploded through the network. Within days, every prisoner in our cell block knew. A rescue was being planned. We weren't forgotten. They were coming for us. But here's where it got complicated. We didn't know if they were coming to this prison or another one. North Vietnam had dozens of prison camps. We were in Hoa Lo, the main Hanoi facility, but there was also the Zoo, the Plantation, the Briar Patch, Faith, Hope, and a dozen others scattered across the north. Statistically, the odds that they'd hit our specific facility were low. Still, we had to prepare. Colonel Stevens sent orders through the network. Every prisoner was to gather intelligence on their section of the camp. Guard rotations, lock mechanisms, wall thickness, distance to potential exits, layout of corridors, anything that might help in a rescue scenario. We also developed escape signals. If the rescue came, if commandos breached the compound, we needed a way to identify ourselves as Americans in the chaos. The agreed signal: tap SOS repeatedly on your cell door and shout your name and service number. Weeks passed, then months. The rescue never came. Later I learned it had happened, the Sun Tay raid, a brilliantly executed operation that hit a prison camp 60 miles from us. They killed dozens of enemy soldiers and extracted nobody. The camp was empty. The prisoners had been moved months earlier. When we finally heard about it through new arrivals, the disappointment was crushing. They'd come for us. American commandos had risked their lives to get us out. But they'd hit the wrong target. We were still here, still trapped, still suffering. But here's what that raid did accomplish. It terrified the North Vietnamese. Suddenly they realized that nowhere was safe. American commandos could appear anywhere, anytime. In response, they consolidated prisoners, moved us from scattered camps into larger, more defensible facilities where they could concentrate guards and security. That's how I ended up moving again on day 147. They came in the middle of the night, blindfolded me, threw me in a truck and drove for what felt like hours. When they removed the blindfold, I was in a new cell, larger, and I could hear voices, American voices, coming from multiple directions. The tap code network in this new facility was massive. Within hours of arrival, I'd made contact with 7 different cells. Within days, I was part of a communications hub connecting over 90 prisoners. This wasn't a cell block. This was an army, imprisoned but unbroken, communicating through walls that our captors thought were solid barriers. And Peters was here, alive, 3 cells away. The first message I got through the network almost made me break down. Morrison, heard you moved in. GBU, still kicking. Peters had survived the punishment block, barely. He'd been tortured extensively, but he'd given them nothing about the tap code. They suspected something, but they couldn't prove it, and Peters had played dumb brilliantly. Now he was back in the general population, and the network was stronger than ever. The 5 words came back to me with force. We are not alone. Resist. But resistance took different forms now. We'd learned that outright defiance just got you tortured without accomplishing anything. Instead, we resisted through subtle acts, following orders slowly, pretending not to understand when we did, making tiny mistakes in confessions that made them useless to Vietnamese propaganda. And through it all we tapped, encouraging each other, sharing news, playing chess. Yes, chess, each move laboriously tapped out, games taking days to complete. Conducting church services on Sundays, with one prisoner tapping out prayers that rippled through the network, 90 men praying simultaneously in solitary cells. The Vietnamese never caught us. Oh, they suspected. They changed our cells randomly. They installed rubber padding on some walls to muffle sound. They conducted surprise inspections at odd hours, but the code was too simple to detect, too widespread to stop, and too valuable to us to abandon. I spent 2 more years in that prison. 730 days after Peters taught me those first 5 letters. 730 days of tapping, praying, resisting, surviving. There were dark times, times when I wanted to give up, times when the interrogations broke something inside me that I wasn't sure would heal, times when I looked at the nail marks on the wall, over 1,000 now, and wondered if I'd ever see mark number 2,000 or 3,000. But I never spent another day truly alone. Every morning, like clockwork, someone would tap GBU to me. Every night I'd tap it back to someone else. We were a network, a brotherhood, a unit separated by walls, but united by 5 words that became our creed. We are not alone. Resist. Looking back now, 15 years after my release, I understand something about those 84 days of silence before Peters reached out. They were necessary. Not good, not pleasant, but necessary. Because they taught me what true isolation is. They showed me how quickly a man can lose himself when he has nothing to hold on to, no connection to another human being. And they made me appreciate something that most people take for granted, the power of human connection. The power of a voice in the darkness saying, I'm here, I see you, you matter. Peters died 6 years ago, heart attack at 54. I spoke at his funeral, told the story of how he saved my life with 5 words tapped through a prison wall. His wife told me that he'd carried a small piece of that wall, a chunk of concrete he'd pried loose and smuggled home, in his pocket every day after his release. Said it reminded him that walls are temporary, but brotherhood is permanent. I have my own piece of wall. It sits on my desk where I can see it every morning, and sometimes, usually late at night when the house is quiet, I'll pick up a pen and tap against the wood. Tap, 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 tap. Just to remember, just to honor, just to remind myself that I was never truly alone, even in my darkest hours, because 53 other Americans refused to let me be. The 5 words that saved us weren't magical. They were simple, but they represented something profound. The refusal to let isolation win. The commitment to reach through barriers, stone walls, language differences, fear itself, and make connection. To tap out a message in the darkness and trust that someone is listening. To be the one who listens when someone else is tapping. We are not alone. That was the message then. That's the message now. Whatever wall you're facing, whatever prison you're in, literal or metaphorical, you are not alone. Somewhere, someone is tapping. Somewhere, someone is listening. The walls are thick, but they're not soundproof. And brotherhood, real brotherhood, can communicate through anything. Those 84 days of fear ended not with a dramatic rescue, not with an escape, not with a sudden change in my circumstances. They ended with a simple sound. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of another human being saying, I'm here, you're not forgotten, keep fighting. That's what saved me. That's what saved all of us. And that's what I hope to pass on to my own children, and to anyone who feels isolated, forgotten, or trapped. Keep tapping. Keep listening. Keep believing that somewhere on the other side of the wall, someone is fighting the same fight you are. We are not alone. We never were. We never will be.